The autumn of 2018 hung heavy over Willow Creek like a funeral shroud, its amber leaves falling in silent surrender to the coming winter. Detective Marcus Rivera pulled his coat tighter as he stepped out of his patrol car, the gravel crunching beneath his boots with an ominous finality that seemed to echo through the morning mist. The call had come in at 6:47 a.m. A body discovered in the abandoned industrial district on the outskirts of town, where rusted machinery stood like tombstones in a graveyard of forgotten dreams. The fog rolled in thick from the nearby river, transforming the landscape into something otherworldly, as if the very earth was trying to conceal its secrets. Rivera had been a cop in Willow Creek for 15 years, had seen his share of domestic disputes, bar fights, and the occasional drug bust. But something about this morning felt different. The air itself seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, thick with the promise of revelations that would shatter the fragile peace of their small Tennessee town. As Rivera approached, his trained eye began cataloging details with mechanical precision. The ground around the shelter bore the telltale signs of recent disturbance. Footprints in the mud, some fresh, others weathered by rain. Scattered debris told stories of transient lives, empty food containers, discarded clothing. The detritus of existence lived on the edge of civilization, but it was what lay inside the makeshift structure that would haunt him for years to come. The body belonged to a young woman, perhaps 16 or 17 years old. Her small frame curled in the fetal position, as if seeking comfort even in death. Her auburn hair, streaked with premature blonde highlights, fanned out across a grimy pillow like spilled paint. She wore a tattered denim jacket over a thin cotton dress, clothes that spoke of desperation and the kind of poverty that gnawed at the soul. Her feet were bare, the soles blackened with dirt and neglect, fingernails bitten down to the quick in what Rivera recognized as a nervous habit born of chronic anxiety. "Who found her?" Rivera asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might disturb whatever ghosts lingered in this forsaken place. "Joey Brennan, the guy who runs the scrap metal business down the road," Martinez replied, consulting her notepad with trembling hands. "He comes through here every Tuesday morning, looking for copper and steel he can salvage. Says he saw the shelter and thought someone might be squatting, wanted to check if they needed help." She paused, swallowing hard. Poor bastard got more than he bargained for. Rivera knelt beside the body, his practiced eye noting details that would later prove crucial. No obvious signs of violence, no blood, no defensive wounds on the hands or arms. The girl appeared almost peaceful, as if she had simply laid down for a nap and never woken up. But Rivera knew better than to trust appearances. Death rarely came so gently to the young and desperate. "Any ID on her?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Nothing. No purse, no phone, no identification of any kind. Just what you see." Martinez gestured helplessly at the sparse scene. "It's like she was a ghost even before she died." The coroner, Dr. Elena Vasquez, arrived 20 minutes later, her silver hair pulled back in a professional bun that couldn't quite disguise the weariness in her eyes. She had been performing autopsies in Willow Creek for 3 decades, had seen enough death to fill several lifetimes, but something about this case seemed to affect her more deeply than usual. "Preliminary examinations suggest she's been dead for at least 4 days. Maybe longer," Dr. Vasquez said after completing her initial assessment. "The cool weather and shelter from the elements have slowed decomposition, but the condition of the body suggests she died sometime last week." She paused, looking up at Rivera with troubled eyes. "There's something else, Marcus. This girl has clearly been living rough for months, maybe longer. Her teeth are in terrible condition, multiple cavities, signs of malnutrition. Her body shows evidence of chronic stress, possibly drug use." Rivera felt a familiar weight settle in his chest, the heavy recognition of a life that had spiraled beyond salvation, long before death claimed its final victory. These were the cases that kept him awake at night, the ones that reminded him how easily the safety net of society could fail those who needed it most. "Any idea what killed her?" he asked. Too early to say definitively, but I don't see obvious signs of trauma. Could be overdose. Could be natural causes brought on by her lifestyle. Could be something else entirely. The autopsy will tell us more. Dr. Vasquez stood, brushing dirt from her knees with clinical detachment. One thing I can tell you, this girl was probably someone's daughter. Someone somewhere is wondering why their baby never came home. As the coroner's team prepared to transport the body, Rivera began the methodical process of documenting the scene. He photographed everything: the shelter, the surrounding area, the girl's position, every piece of debris that might hold a clue to her identity or the circumstances of her death. It was painstaking work, but Rivera had learned over the years that the smallest detail could sometimes crack a case wide open. The shelter itself told a story of desperation and ingenuity. Someone had constructed it with careful attention to basic survival needs. The metal sheets were angled to shed rain, plastic tarps created additional weatherproofing, and a small space had been cleared for a makeshift bed, constructed from cardboard and salvaged fabric. It wasn't much, but it represented someone's best attempt to carve out a place of safety in an unforgiving world. "Detective Rivera," a gruff voice interrupted his thoughts. Joey Brennan stood at the edge of the crime scene tape, a man in his 60s with weathered hands and kind eyes that had seen too much hardship. "I hope it's okay that I'm still here. I keep thinking about that poor girl. Nobody should die alone like that." Rivera approached the older man, recognizing in him the type of person who formed the backbone of small communities, working-class folks who minded their own business, but couldn't ignore suffering when they encountered it. "Mr. Brennan, I'd like to ask you a few questions about what you saw this morning, if that's all right." "Of course, Detective. Whatever I can do to help." "When you discovered the body, did you notice anything unusual about the area? Anything that seemed out of place or different from your previous visits?" Brennan scratched his grizzled chin, considering the question carefully. "Well, I don't come through this specific spot very often, maybe once a month at most, but I did notice that shelter there wasn't here the last time I was through, which would have been about 6 weeks ago. Someone put some real effort into building that thing." "Did you see anyone else around here recently? Anyone who might have been staying in the area?" "Funny you should ask. About 2 weeks ago, I saw a young girl walking along the main road that leads to this area. She was carrying a backpack, looked like she was having a rough go of it. I thought about stopping to offer help." Brennan's voice trailed off, guilt written across his weathered features. "I guess I was worried about getting involved in something that wasn't my business. Now I wish I had." Rivera made careful notes, already beginning to construct a timeline in his mind. A shelter that appeared within the last 6 weeks. A young woman spotted in the area 2 weeks ago. A body that had been dead for 4 to 7 days. The pieces were starting to form a picture, though the full image remained frustratingly unclear. "This girl you saw, can you describe her?" "Small thing, maybe 5'4" or so. Thin, looked like she hadn't been eating regular meals, had reddish-brown hair with some blonde in it, wore a denim jacket that was too big for her. She was walking with purpose, like she knew where she was going, but there was something about her that seemed, I don't know, scared maybe." The description matched their victim perfectly. Rivera felt the familiar stirring of a case beginning to take shape, the gradual emergence of a human story from the stark facts of death and abandonment. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to need you to come to the station later today to give a formal statement, and I want you to think carefully about anything else you might have seen or heard in this area recently. Sometimes the smallest details can be important." As Brennan nodded and headed back to his truck, Rivera turned his attention to the broader area surrounding the crime scene. The abandoned industrial district stretched for several acres, a testament to Willow Creek's more prosperous past, when manufacturing jobs provided steady employment for hundreds of families. Now it stood like a monument to economic decline, its empty buildings and rusted machinery creating a landscape that seemed designed for concealing secrets. Officer Martinez appeared at his elbow, her expression grim. I've been thinking about something, Detective. This location, it's pretty isolated, but it's also close to the truck route that connects to interstate. If someone wanted to disappear, or if someone wanted to make someone else disappear, this would be a perfect spot. Rivera nodded, the same thought having occurred to him. The location offered both seclusion and accessibility, the kind of place where transient populations might gather without drawing attention from law enforcement or concerned citizens. It was also the kind of place where predators might hunt for vulnerable victims. Let's expand the search area, he decided. I want to know if there are other shelters like this one, other signs that people have been living rough in this area. And let's start checking with local social services, see if anyone has been working with homeless youth recently. Rivera found himself drawn repeatedly to the makeshift shelter, trying to understand the story it told. Someone had invested considerable time and effort in its construction, suggesting this wasn't just a temporary stopping point, but a place where someone had planned to stay for an extended period. The arrangement of personal items inside, a small cache of canned food, a water bottle, a few items of spare clothing, spoke of someone trying to create stability in an unstable world. But there were also troubling signs. A small mirror propped against one wall, surrounded by cosmetics that seemed too sophisticated for a homeless teenager. A collection of $20 bills tucked into a plastic bag, more money than someone living in such conditions should reasonably possess. And most disturbing of all, a cell phone hidden beneath the makeshift mattress, its battery long dead but its presence suggesting connections to a world beyond this desolate shelter. Detective Rivera, Dr. Vasquez approached, pulling off her latex gloves with practiced efficiency. I've completed the preliminary examination. There's something I think you should know. Rivera looked up from his examination of the shelter, noting the troubled expression on the coroner's face. The revelation hit Rivera like a physical blow. A pregnant teenager, living alone in an abandoned industrial area, dead under mysterious circumstances. The case had just become exponentially more complex and more heartbreaking. Any signs of sexual assault? I'll know more after the full autopsy, but initial examination doesn't suggest recent trauma. However, given her lifestyle and the circumstances, I'll be conducting a very thorough investigation. How long until you can give me a preliminary cause of death? I'll start the autopsy this afternoon. Initial results by tomorrow morning. Full toxicology will take longer. Dr. Vasquez paused, studying Rivera's expression. Marcus, I've been doing this job for 30 years, and I've learned to read the signs. This girl was in trouble long before she died. Whatever killed her, it was probably just the final chapter in a very sad story. As the coroner's van disappeared into the morning mist, carrying its tragic cargo toward answers that might bring justice but could never bring redemption, Rivera stood alone in the abandoned lot. The crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze like prayer flags, marking the boundaries of a mystery that he sensed would challenge everything he thought he knew about his quiet hometown. The discovery of the cell phone had been the most intriguing development of the morning. Even with a dead battery, the device might contain a wealth of information. Contacts, messages, photos, location data that could trace the girl's movements in her final weeks. Rivera had already called in a specialist from the state crime lab to extract whatever data might be recoverable. But as he prepared to leave the scene, something caught his eye. Tucked beneath a pile of debris about 20 feet from the shelter, partially hidden by a rusted metal drum, was a small notebook. The cover was water-damaged and faded, but the pages inside appeared to be filled with handwriting in blue ink. Rivera carefully bagged the notebook as evidence, but not before glimpsing enough of its contents to understand its significance. This wasn't just a diary or journal. It was a detailed record of dates, times, locations, and amounts of money. The girl had been keeping meticulous records of something, and Rivera had a sinking suspicion he knew what that something might be. The notebook contained names, too. First names only, but with enough descriptive detail to suggest the author was documenting encounters with specific individuals. Some entries were marked with symbols Rivera didn't immediately recognize, while others contained what appeared to be warnings or reminders written in an increasingly desperate hand. As he drove back toward town, Rivera felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Somewhere in Willow Creek, someone was going about their daily routine, unaware that their daughter, sister, friend, or lover was lying cold and still in the county morgue. Somewhere else, someone who might have been responsible for her death was probably sleeping peacefully, believing their secret was buried with her in that makeshift grave. But Rivera had spent 15 years learning that the dead don't keep secrets forever. They whisper their stories through evidence, through witnesses, through the patient work of investigators who refuse to let their voices be silenced. This unnamed girl would have her story told, would have her killer brought to justice, would have her short life acknowledged and remembered. The notebook felt heavy in the evidence bag beside him, weighted with secrets that might unlock not just the mystery of one girl's death, but possibly a larger web of exploitation and violence that had been operating in the shadows of his small town. Rivera had investigated cases of human trafficking before, had seen how predators targeted the most vulnerable members of society, runaways, addicts, kids aging out of foster care who had nowhere else to turn. As he pulled into the parking lot of the Willow Creek Police Department, Rivera's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the area code was local. "Detective Rivera," he answered. "Detective, this is Ashley Thompson from the Sunrise Youth Center. I heard through the grapevine that a young woman's body was found this morning, and I think it might be one of our kids." Rivera felt his pulse quicken. "What makes you think that, Miss Thompson?" "We had a girl go missing about 3 weeks ago. Ran away from our facility in the middle of the night. Her name was Catherine Mills, but she went by Kat. She was 17, had been with us for about 6 months after aging out of foster care." Thompson's voice was strained with worry and guilt. She'd been having a really hard time, struggling with depression and some other issues. We tried to help her, but she didn't trust adults, didn't want to follow our rules. "Can you describe her?" "About 5'4", maybe a levy 110 pounds. Auburn hair that she'd bleached blonde in streaks. She had this denim jacket that she wore everywhere, said it belonged to her mother, and detective, she was pregnant. About 2 months along when she disappeared." Rivera closed his eyes, feeling the pieces of the puzzle beginning to lock into place with sickening clarity. "Miss Thompson, I need you to come to the station immediately. Bring any records you have on Catherine Mills, any photographs, any information about her background, her family, anyone she might have been in contact with." "Oh God," Thompson whispered. "It's her, isn't it? She's dead. We haven't made a positive identification yet, but I think you're right to be concerned. How soon can you get here?" "I'm leaving now." "Detective Rivera, there's something else you should know about Kat. She'd been involved in some dangerous situations before she came to us. The caseworkers suspected she might have been trafficked, might have been forced into prostitution. We were trying to get her into counseling, but she ran before we could make any real progress." Rivera felt a chill run down his spine. The notebook, the money, the strategic location of the shelter. It was all starting to make horrifying sense. "Miss Thompson, when you come in, I want you to bring any information you have about who Kat might have been involved with, anyone who might have been exploiting her, and I want to know everything about how she ended up at your facility." "I'll bring everything I have," Thompson promised. "Detective, please tell me you're going to catch whoever did this to her." "That's exactly what I'm going to do," Rivera replied with quiet determination, as he ended the call and walked toward the police station. Rivera felt the familiar surge of purpose that came with the beginning of a major investigation. Catherine Mills' Kat had been failed by nearly every system designed to protect vulnerable youth, but she wouldn't be failed by the justice system. Not if Rivera had anything to say about it. The case was no longer about an unnamed girl found dead in an abandoned lot. It was about Catherine Mills, a 17-year-old who had been pregnant and desperate, who had been living in the shadows of society where predators waited for girls just like her. It was about a system that had allowed her to slip through the cracks, and about the people who had taken advantage of her vulnerability. Rivera pushed through the doors of the police station, the notebook heavy in his evidence bag, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He had a name now, a starting point, a trail to follow. But something told him that following that trail was going to lead him into the darkest corners of Willow Creek's hidden underworld. And as he settled at his desk to begin the long process of unraveling Catherine Mills' story, Rivera had no idea that the notebook in his evidence bag contained information that would not only solve her murder, but expose a network of corruption and exploitation that reached into the highest levels of the community he had spent 15 years serving and protecting. The phone on his desk rang again, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed the crime lab. Rivera here. Detective, this is tech specialist Amanda Cruz. I've got preliminary results on that cell phone you sent over. That was fast. Well, it wasn't as damaged as we initially thought. We were able to recover quite a bit of data, including text messages from the last few weeks before the battery died. Cruz paused. Detective, you're going to want to see this. The messages, they suggest this girl was being controlled by someone, possibly trafficked. And some of the phone numbers she was in contact with. Well, let's just say they're going to surprise you. Rivera felt his blood run cold. How surprised are we talking about? Surprised enough that you're going to want to handle this investigation very carefully. I'm sending over the preliminary data now, but, Detective, some of these numbers belong to very prominent people in your community. As Rivera hung up the phone, he stared out the window at the quiet streets of Willow Creek, where families were going about their normal Tuesday routines, unaware that their peaceful town was about to be shaken to its foundation. Catherine Mills was dead, but her story was just beginning to unfold, and Rivera had a feeling that before it was over, nothing in Willow Creek would ever be the same again. The notebook lay open on his desk now, its water-stained pages revealing a systematic record of exploitation that made Rivera's stomach turn. Names, dates, amounts of money, locations, all documented in Kat's careful handwriting, a teenager's attempt to maintain some sense of control over a situation that had spiraled beyond her ability to manage. But it was the final entry that made Rivera's blood run cold, written in increasingly desperate handwriting just days before her death. He said, if I try to leave again, he'll make sure I disappear forever. I'm scared. I think he means it. If something happens to me, look for the man with the eagle tattoo. He's not who everyone thinks he is. Rivera stared at the entry, his mind racing. Somewhere in Willow Creek, a man with an eagle tattoo was going about his daily routine, believing he had silenced the only witness to his crimes. But Catherine Mills had been smarter than he'd given her credit for. She had left a trail, a record, a voice that would speak from beyond the grave. The investigation was just beginning, but Rivera already knew it was going to change everything. The fluorescent lights of the Willow Creek Police Department hummed with an electrical tension that seemed to mirror Detective Rivera's growing unease. It was 2:30 p.m., and the preliminary data from Catherine Mills' cell phone lay spread across his desk like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that formed an increasingly disturbing picture. Ashley Thompson from the Sunrise Youth Center had arrived an hour earlier, her face pale with the weight of confirmation that one of her kids was dead. Cat was complicated, Thompson said, clutching a manila folder containing Catherine's case files. She was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and the kind of weary compassion that came from years of working with society's most vulnerable youth. She'd been in the system since she was 12, bounced from foster home to foster home. Most of the families couldn't handle her behavior issues. Rivera studied the photographs Thompson had provided, school pictures showing a girl whose eyes aged years between each successive shot. In the earliest photo, Catherine looked like any other kid, gap-toothed smile and pigtails. By the final picture, taken just months before her death. Her eyes held the hollow wariness of someone who had learned too young that the world was not a safe place. What kind of behavior issues? Rivera asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. What happened with the Johnsons? Thompson shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Kat accused the father, Robert Johnson, of inappropriate contact. He denied it, said she was acting out for attention. Without proof, and given Kat's history of behavioral problems, the placement was simply terminated and she was moved to a group home. How did she end up pregnant? She was about 6 weeks along when she came to us, though she didn't tell anyone for another month. She refused to say who the father was, just kept saying it didn't matter because she was going to take care of it. Thompson opened the folder and pulled out a psychological evaluation. But Dr. Tricia Simmons, our staff psychologist, noted signs of what she called trauma bonding. Essentially, Kat seemed to be protecting someone she was afraid of. The pieces were starting to form a clearer picture, one that made Rivera's stomach turn. A traumatized teenager, pregnant by someone she was afraid to identify, living in an abandoned lot while keeping detailed records of what appeared to be commercial sexual exploitation. Tell me about the night she ran away. Thompson consulted her notes. October 15th, about 3 weeks ago. Kat had been increasingly agitated for several days, jumpy, constantly checking her phone. The night staff said she seemed scared of something, kept looking out the windows like she was expecting someone. Around 2 a.m., she slipped out through a fire exit that had been propped open. We think someone might have been waiting for her. Someone from outside contacted her. That's our theory. The night before she left, one of the other residents said they saw Kat crying while talking on her phone. She kept saying, "I can't do this anymore, and please don't make me." When the other girl tried to comfort her, Kat just said she had to go back to work. Rivera felt his jaw tighten. At 17, pregnant and traumatized, Catherine Mills had been pulled back into a world that was slowly killing her. The notebook entries he'd studied that morning painted a picture of systematic exploitation, regular appointments, specified acts, carefully tracked payments. But the final entries showed increasing desperation and fear. Miss Thompson, I need to ask you about staff at your facility. Anyone who might have had inappropriate contact with Kat, anyone she seemed particularly afraid of or attached. Thompson's expression grew troubled. There was one incident, about a month before she ran away. Kat accused our night security guard, Frank Morrison, of coming into her room inappropriately. She said he'd been watching her, making comments about her body. Frank denied it completely, said she was just acting out because he'd caught her trying to sneak out one night. What was your investigation's conclusion? Inconclusive. It came down to he said, she said, and given Kat's history, Thompson trailed off, looking ashamed. We should have believed her. We should have protected her better. Rivera studied Frank Morrison's personnel file, noting his address in the trailer park on the south side of town, his background in private security, his military service record. Something nagged at him about the file, some detail that seemed significant. This military service, what branch? Army, served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Honorably discharged in 2015. Thompson consulted the file. He has a tattoo from his service, actually. Big eagle on his forearm. He was always proud of his military record. Rivera's blood went cold. The man with the eagle tattoo. Catherine's final notebook entry suddenly took on new significance, and he realized they might have just identified their primary suspect. I need Frank Morrison's current address and phone number, Rivera said, his voice carefully controlled. And I need you to not contact him or anyone else about our conversation today. Thompson nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. As she gathered her files to leave, Rivera was already planning his next moves. But first, he needed to review the data tech specialist Cruz had recovered from Catherine's phone. But it was the contact list that truly shocked him. Among the numbers Catherine had been in regular contact with were several that belonged to pillars of the Willow Creek community. City Councilman Richard Hartley, prominent businessmen Thomas Mitchell, and most disturbing of all, Judge Harold Whitmore, who presided over the county's family court system. Rivera stared at the evidence, understanding that he was looking at a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of local government. These weren't random predators. They were respected members of the community who had used their positions of power to exploit vulnerable young women like Catherine Mills. His phone rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. The caller ID showed Chief of Police Daniel Brooks. "Rivera, I need to see you in my office. Now." Rivera gathered the evidence files and walked down the hallway to Brooks's office, noting that the chief's door was closed and the blinds were drawn. Always a bad sign. "Sit down, Marcus." Brooks's tone was formal, professional, but Rivera detected an undercurrent of tension. "I understand you're investigating the death of that homeless girl found this morning." "Catherine Mills, yes, sir. 17 years old, runaway from the Sunrise Youth Center." "Right. Well, I've been getting calls from some concerned citizens about the scope of your investigation. It seems you've been making inquiries that might reflect poorly on prominent members of our community." Rivera felt his pulse quicken. "Sir, the evidence suggests that Catherine was involved in prostitution, possibly trafficking. Her phone records show contact with several local numbers that—" "That's enough," Brooks interrupted. "Marcus, I know you mean well, but you need to be very careful about making accusations without solid proof. These are respectable people we're talking about. Pillars of the community. A dead runaway's phone records aren't going to be enough to destroy their reputations." "Chief, with respect, Catherine Mills was murdered. The evidence suggests she was being exploited by a network of— The evidence suggests she was a troubled girl who got involved with the wrong people and died as a result." Brooks cut him off. "That's tragic, but it's not necessarily murder, and it's certainly not grounds for a witch hunt against respected community members." Rivera stared at his superior, realization dawning with sickening clarity. "Chief, are you telling me to limit my investigation?" Brooks leaned back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm telling you to be thorough, but prudent. Follow the evidence where it leads, but don't go chasing conspiracy theories based on a dead girl's phone records. Focus on finding her killer, not manufacturing scandals." As Rivera left the chief's office, he understood that he was now walking a tightrope. The very people who should be supporting his investigation were instead protecting the suspects, and he was beginning to understand why. In a small town like Willow Creek, everyone was connected to everyone else, and the truth about Catherine Mills threatened to bring down a carefully constructed house of cards. But Rivera had spent 15 years learning that justice wasn't always convenient, and protecting the vulnerable was more important than protecting the powerful. He would continue his investigation, even if it meant going up against his own department. His next stop was the trailer park, where Frank Morrison lived, a collection of aging mobile homes arranged in neat rows behind a chain-link fence. Morrison's trailer was at the back of the park, isolated from the others, with a pickup truck parked outside and a motorcycle under a tarp. Rivera knocked on the door and waited, noting the security cameras mounted on the trailer's corners, unusual for this neighborhood. After several moments, the door opened to reveal a man in his 40s, with close-cropped hair and suspicious eyes. The eagle tattoo on his forearm was immediately visible, exactly as Catherine had described. "Frank Morrison?" "Yeah, what do you want?" Morrison's expression didn't change, but Rivera noticed his hand tighten on the doorframe. "Who?" "Catherine Mills. She was a resident at the Sunrise Youth Center, where you work security. She was found dead this morning." "Never heard of her," Morrison said flatly, "and I don't work at the youth center anymore. Quit last month." Rivera consulted his notes, though he already knew Morrison was lying. "According to my records, you're still employed there, and Catherine Mills made several complaints about your behavior toward her." Look, detective, I don't know what you're trying to pull here, but I've got nothing to say about some dead runaway. Those kids make up stories all the time, trying to get attention or get people in trouble. Where were you last Tuesday night, Mr. Morrison? Rivera placed his hand on the door, preventing Morrison from closing it. Actually, Mr. Morrison, I think we need to continue this conversation at the station. Am I under arrest? Not yet, but I strongly encourage you to come with me voluntarily. Morrison stared at Rivera for a long moment, calculation evident in his eyes. I'll need to call my lawyer. That's your right. But first, I'd like to take a look around your property. I can get a warrant or you can give consent. Get your warrant, Morrison said, slamming the door. Rivera walked back to his patrol car, already calling Judge Patricia Coleman to request a search warrant. But as he drove away from the trailer park, he noticed a black SUV with tinted windows following him at a distance. When he made a series of random turns to test his suspicion, the SUV stayed with him. Someone was watching his investigation very closely, and Rivera had a sinking feeling that his conversation with Chief Brooks hadn't been the end of the pressure to back off the case. He pulled into the parking lot of a convenience store and watched as the SUV drove past without stopping. The license plate was obscured by mud, and the driver was impossible to identify through the tinted windows. But the message was clear. Rivera was walking into dangerous territory, and not everyone wanted Catherine Mills' story to be told. By the time Rivera returned to the police station, the search warrant for Morrison's trailer had been approved. But when he called to assemble a search team, he was told that all available officers were tied up with other cases. When he asked Chief Brooks for support, he was told that the warrant could wait until tomorrow. Rivera understood that he was being stalled, that forces within his own department were working to protect the network Catherine had documented in her notebook, but he also knew that evidence had a way of disappearing when investigations moved too slowly. That evening, Rivera sat in his apartment, poring over Catherine's notebook and phone records by lamplight. The teenager's careful documentation revealed a system of exploitation that was both sophisticated and widespread. She had been trafficked not just by individual predators, but by an organized network that included law enforcement, judiciary, and business leaders. The notebook contained detailed information about locations where Catherine had been forced to meet clients: a warehouse on the outskirts of town owned by Thomas Mitchell's construction company, a hunting cabin that belonged to Judge Whitmore, rooms at the Riverside Motel that were apparently rented on a regular basis for these encounters. But it was Catherine's final entries that revealed the true horror of her situation. She had discovered she was pregnant and wanted out of the life that was destroying her. Her handler, almost certainly Frank Morrison, based on the timing and descriptions, had threatened to kill her if she tried to leave. The final entry, written just days before her death, was a desperate plea for help that would never be answered. "I can't take this anymore. The baby doesn't deserve this life. I'm going to try to run tomorrow night. If something happens to me, I hope someone finds this and makes them pay. They think they own me, but I'm not property. I'm a person, and I deserve better." Rivera felt tears sting his eyes as he read Catherine's words. She had died trying to claim her humanity, to protect the child she was carrying, to escape a system that treated her as a commodity to be bought and sold. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Drop the investigation. Some stones are better left unturned." Rivera stared at the message, understanding that the stakes had just been raised considerably. But instead of intimidating him, the threat only strengthened his resolve. Catherine Mills had died alone and afraid, but she wouldn't be forgotten, and her killers wouldn't escape justice. He was about to turn off his phone when it rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Elena Vasquez. "Marcus, I've completed the preliminary autopsy. You need to hear this." "What did you find?" "Catherine Mills didn't die of natural causes or an overdose. She was strangled, manually. The bruising pattern on her neck suggests someone with large hands, probably a man with significant upper body strength. Dr. Vasquez paused. And Marcus, there's something else. The timing of her death. Rivera felt the world tilt around him. She gave birth, delivered a baby, probably full term or close to it, within 24 hours of her death. But Marcus, there's no baby. Someone took that child and then killed Catherine to keep her quiet. The revelation hit Rivera like a physical blow. Catherine hadn't just been murdered. She had been killed after giving birth to a child that had been stolen from her. The notebook's references to her pregnancy, her desperate desire to escape, her final attempt to run. It all made horrifying sense now. Any idea what happened to the baby? No physical evidence at the scene, but based on the medical evidence, I'd say the child was born alive and healthy. Someone took that baby, Marcus, and they killed Catherine to cover their tracks. As Rivera ended the call, he stared out his apartment window at the quiet streets of Willow Creek, where normal families were settling in for the evening, unaware that their community harbored monsters who would steal babies and murder teenagers to protect their secrets. But now Rivera understood that this wasn't just about prostitution or trafficking. It was about something much worse, a network that was stealing children. And Catherine Mills had died because she tried to protect her baby from becoming another victim. The black SUV was parked across the street from his apartment building, and Rivera could see the glowing tip of a cigarette in the driver's seat. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. They wanted him to know he was being watched, wanted him to understand the consequences of digging too deep. Rivera closed Catherine's notebook and locked it in his safe, along with copies of all the evidence he'd gathered. Tomorrow he would execute the search warrant on Morrison's trailer, and he had a feeling he was going to find evidence that would blow the case wide open. Detective Marcus Rivera. The hunter had become the hunted, and tomorrow would determine whether justice would prevail or whether Catherine's story would be buried along with everyone who tried to tell it. Dawn broke over Willow Creek like a crime scene photographer's flash, harsh and revealing, stripping away the shadows that had hidden the town's darkest secrets. Detective Marcus Rivera sat in his patrol car outside the police station at 5:47 a.m., watching the black SUV that had maintained its vigil throughout the night. The driver had changed shift around 3 a.m., but the message remained clear. He was a marked man. "Detective, what I'm about to show you, it's going to change everything," Cruz said, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. Catherine Mills' phone contained encrypted communications that took me all night to decode. She wasn't just documenting her exploitation, she was gathering evidence. The screen filled with decoded messages that made Rivera's blood run cold. Catherine hadn't been just a victim. She had been an informant, secretly working with someone to expose the trafficking network. The messages revealed a systematic operation that went far beyond what Rivera had initially suspected. She was working with FBI agent Sarah Hendricks from the Memphis field office. Cruz continued, pulling up contact records. "Look at these message timestamps." Catherine was providing detailed intelligence about the network's operations, client lists, financial transactions, everything. Rivera stared at the evidence, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. The FBI knew about this operation. More than that, according to these communications, Catherine was supposed to be extracted from the situation 2 weeks ago. Agent Hendricks was coordinating with local law enforcement to take down the entire network. Cruz paused, meeting Rivera's eyes. But someone tipped them off. The operation was compromised and Catherine was killed to prevent her from testifying. The implications hit Rivera like a freight train. Catherine Mills hadn't died because she tried to escape. She had died because someone in law enforcement had betrayed an FBI operation, marking her for execution by the very people she was helping to bring down. Who else knew about the FBI involvement? Cruz consulted her notes. According to the encrypted files, only Agent Hendricks and one local contact who was supposed to coordinate the extraction. The local contact's codename was Eagle One. Rivera felt his world shift on its axis. Eagle One, the man with the eagle tattoo. Frank Morrison hadn't been Catherine's pimp. He had been her FBI handler, working undercover to bring down the trafficking network. And someone had discovered his true identity and turned him into a scapegoat. Cruz, I need you to contact Agent Hendricks immediately. Tell her Detective Rivera needs to speak with her about Operation. He paused, looking at the encrypted files. What was the operation called? Operation Stolen Innocence, Cruz replied. But Detective, there's something else you need to know. Agent Hendricks went missing 3 days ago. The Memphis field office has been looking for her. Rivera felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. An FBI agent missing. Catherine Mills murdered. Frank Morrison framed as the perpetrator. The corruption network wasn't just protecting their operation. They were systematically eliminating everyone who threatened to expose them. His phone rang. Chief Brooks. Rivera, where the hell are you? You were supposed to execute that search warrant an hour ago. I'm following up on some new evidence, Chief. I think we may have made a mistake about Morrison. The only mistake would be backing down now, Brooks said, his voice carrying a strange urgency. Execute that warrant immediately. Morrison is our suspect, and we need to move before he destroys evidence. Rivera understood. Brooks wasn't trying to solve the case, he was trying to frame Morrison and close the investigation before the real truth could emerge. The search warrant was a setup designed to plant evidence that would make Morrison look guilty while protecting the actual perpetrators. I'll be there in 30 minutes, Rivera lied, already planning his next move. But first, he needed to find Frank Morrison before someone else did. If Morrison was really an undercover FBI agent, he was probably the only person left alive who knew the full extent of the corruption network. And if Rivera was right, Morrison was already marked for death. Rivera drove toward Morrison's trailer park, taking a circuitous route to avoid the surveillance team he knew was tracking him. But as he turned onto the dirt road leading to the mobile home community, he saw smoke rising from the back of the park. Thick, black smoke that spoke of more than just a cooking fire. Frank Morrison's trailer was fully engulfed in flames, and the local fire department was already on scene, their hoses fighting a losing battle against the inferno. Rivera badged his way past the fire line, looking for any sign of Morrison, but the heat was too intense to get close to the structure. Any casualties? He asked Fire Chief Tom Bradley. Haven't been able to get close enough to check, Bradley replied. But if anyone was inside when this started, they're gone now. Rivera watched the flames consuming what might have been the only evidence that could prove Morrison's innocence and expose the real criminals. The timing was too convenient, the destruction too complete. Someone had decided that Frank Morrison knew too much to be allowed to live, even as a framed patsy. But as Rivera studied the scene, he noticed something the arsonists had missed. Morrison's motorcycle, which had been parked under a tarp behind the trailer, was gone. Either Morrison had escaped before the fire started, or someone had moved his bike to make it look like he had fled. Chief Bradley, when did you get the call about this fire? About 20 minutes ago. Anonymous tip called it in. Rivera nodded, understanding. 20 minutes ago, he had been at the crime lab learning the truth about Catherine Mills. Someone had been monitoring his movements and had decided to eliminate the Morrison problem while Rivera was distracted. His phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Stop digging, or you'll join them. But instead of intimidating Rivera, the threat only confirmed that he was getting close to the truth. And somewhere in Willow Creek, Catherine Mills's baby was still in the hands of monsters who would kill anyone who tried to rescue the child. Rivera's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Detective Rivera? The voice was male, gravelly, speaking in whispers. Who is this? Frank Morrison. I've been expecting your call. Rivera felt his pulse quicken. Where are you? Somewhere safe, for now. But we need to meet, and it has to be now. They've burned my cover, literally, and they'll be coming for me next. Are you FBI? Special Agent Frank Morrison, undercover for 18 months. Catherine Mills was my CI, and someone in your department sold us out." Morrison's voice was strained with exhaustion and fear. "Detective, they have the baby. Catherine's baby, and if we don't move fast, that child is going to disappear forever." Rivera felt his heart racing. "Where's the baby now?" "That's what Catherine figured out before they killed her. She discovered where they take the children, where the adoption network operates from. It's not just about trafficking teenagers for sex. They're stealing babies and selling them to wealthy clients who don't ask questions about where they come from." Jesus Christ. "Detective, Catherine died trying to protect her child. She left me a message the night before she was killed. Told me she had hidden evidence that would bring down the entire operation. But she was murdered before she could tell me where." Rivera thought about Catherine's notebook, her careful documentation, her final desperate entries. "Morrison, I think I know where she hid it." "Where?" "The makeshift shelter where her body was found. There was something about that location that didn't make sense, too elaborate for someone just trying to survive. She wasn't just living there, she was using it as a safe house." "Meet me there in 30 minutes, Morrison said. "And detective, don't trust anyone in your department. The corruption goes all the way to the top." Rivera ended the call and sat in his patrol car, watching Morrison's trailer burn, understanding that he was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. He was going rogue, defying his own department, pursuing an investigation that powerful people were willing to kill to stop. The abandoned industrial area looked different in the harsh morning light, less atmospheric and more simply desolate. The crime scene tape had been removed, the shelter left undisturbed since yesterday's investigation. But as Rivera approached the structure, he noticed something he had missed before. The carefully arranged debris wasn't random. It formed a pattern, a coded message that Catherine had left for someone who knew how to read it. Frank Morrison emerged from the shadows of a nearby building, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who had spent months living a dangerous lie. He looked older than Rivera had expected, his face lined with exhaustion and stress, but his eyes held the focused intensity of a professional lawman. "She was brilliant," Morrison said without preamble, studying Catherine's shelter. 17 years old and smarter than half the agents I've worked with. She figured out the adoption connection, mapped out the entire network, even identified the offshore accounts they used to launder money. "How did you recruit her?" "I didn't. She recruited me." Morrison knelt beside the shelter, running his hands over the carefully arranged materials. "She approached me at the youth center, said she knew I wasn't really security, asked if I was working for the good guys. Kid had been abused by so many authority figures that she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read people." Rivera watched Morrison search through the debris with practiced efficiency, understanding that Catherine had left a message for her FBI handler, one that only he would know how to decode. "Here," Morrison said, pulling a waterproof pouch from inside what appeared to be solid metal sheeting. "She hid this where only I would think to look." The pouch contained a flash drive, several photographs, and a letter written in Catherine's careful handwriting. Morrison's hands shook as he read the letter, his professional composure cracking under the weight of personal loss. "What does it say?" Morrison looked up, tears glistening in his eyes. She knew she was going to die. This letter, it's her final testimony, everything she learned about the network, everyone involved, and where they took the babies. Rivera felt his heart pounding. "Where?" "Harmony Hills Farm," Morrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a private estate about 20 miles outside town, owned by Judge Harold Whitmore. They've been running an illegal adoption ring, stealing babies from trafficked teenagers and selling them to wealthy families who pay premium prices for discreet adoptions." The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Judge Whitmore, who presided over family court, had been using his position to facilitate illegal adoptions while participating in the trafficking network that provided the babies. It was a complete corruption of the justice system, turning the very institutions meant to protect children into instruments of their exploitation. "Catherine's baby?" Rivera felt time slipping away like sand through his fingers. A 4-day-old baby somewhere in the hands of people who viewed children as commodities, and a justice system corrupted from the inside to protect the perpetrators. We need backup, federal agents, someone who can... There is no backup, Morrison interrupted. Agent Hendricks was investigating which local law enforcement officials were compromised. Her last communication suggested the corruption went deeper than we thought. For all we know, calling for help would just alert the network that we're coming. Rivera stared at the evidence in Morrison's hands, understanding that they were completely alone. 2 men against a network that included judges, politicians, law enforcement officials, and wealthy private citizens. The odds were insurmountable, the risks enormous. But somewhere in that network, a 4-day-old baby was waiting for rescue. "What's your plan?" Rivera asked. Morrison studied Catherine's photographs, which showed detailed surveillance of Harmony Hills farm guard positions, security cameras, access routes, building layouts. The teenager had risked her life to gather intelligence that could save her child. "And if we're caught?" Morrison met Rivera's eyes with grim determination. "Then we end up like Catherine and Agent Hendricks. But detective, that baby is going to disappear into the illegal adoption system if we don't act now. In another day or 2, the child will be with new parents who paid a fortune for a clean birth certificate and no questions asked." Rivera thought about his 15 years in law enforcement, his oath to protect and serve, his responsibility to uphold justice, even when the system itself was corrupted. Catherine Mills had died trying to save her baby, and Rivera wasn't going to let her sacrifice be meaningless. "Let's go get that child." The drive to Harmony Hills farm took them through some of the most beautiful countryside in Tennessee, rolling hills dotted with horse farms and elegant estates that spoke of old money and established power. It was the kind of place where wealthy families built their generational fortunes away from prying eyes, where privacy was purchased and maintained through carefully cultivated political connections. Judge Harold Whitmore's estate sprawled across 200 acres of pristine farmland, its main house a stately colonial mansion that could have graced the pages of Southern Living magazine. But Rivera knew that behind its elegant facade, it was a house built on the suffering of children like Catherine Mills. Morrison parked his motorcycle behind a stand of trees about a quarter-mile from the main house, and they approached on foot, using Catherine's intelligence to avoid the security cameras and motion sensors that protected the property. The teenager's surveillance had been remarkably thorough, revealing guard schedules, blind spots, and the location of what appeared to be a nursery in the mansion's east wing. Rivera studied the house through binoculars, noting the expensive cars parked in the circular driveway. A Bentley, 2 Mercedes, and a Lexus SUV. "Looks like they have company. Potential adoptive parents," Morrison said grimly. Catherine's letter mentioned that Judge Whitmore often arranged for prospective families to visit before finalizing adoptions. They get to see the merchandise before making their purchase. The callousness of it made Rivera's stomach turn. Babies reduced to merchandise, families shopping for children like they were selecting luxury goods, all facilitated by a corrupt judge who used his position to legitimize the transactions. They moved closer to the house, using landscaping and outbuildings for cover, until they reached the service entrance. Catherine had identified in her reconnaissance. Morrison produced a set of lockpicks from his jacket, skills learned during his undercover training, and made quick work of the door's security system. The interior of Harmony Hills farm was as elegant as its exterior suggested, filled with antique furniture, oil paintings, and the kind of refined luxury that money could buy but never truly earn. But as they climbed the service stairs toward the second floor, Rivera could hear sounds that didn't belong in a mansion. The soft crying of infants, hushed voices discussing logistics, the clinical efficiency of people conducting business in human lives. The nursery was larger than Rivera had expected, a converted bedroom that contained 6 cribs, each occupied by an infant of various ages. A middle-aged woman in scrubs, presumably Helen Crawford, was bottle-feeding a baby while discussing placement details with a well-dressed couple. "This one arrived Tuesday," Crawford was saying. "Perfect health, excellent genetics, mother was young and clean. The documentation is already prepared. Birth certificate, medical records, all perfectly legal as far as any future inquiries would be concerned." Rivera felt his hands clench into fists as he realized they were discussing Catherine's baby, describing the child like livestock at auction. But Morrison placed a restraining hand on his arm, reminding him they needed evidence as well as rescue. Morrison activated a small recording device hidden in his jacket, capturing the conversation as Crawford continued her sales pitch. "Judge Whitmore has personally overseen the documentation process, so you can be assured of complete legal protection. The birth mother signed all necessary relinquishment papers before her unfortunate accident. They were calling Catherine's murder an accident, sanitizing her death to make the illegal adoption more palatable to their wealthy clients. We'd like to proceed immediately," the woman said. "My husband and I have been waiting 2 years for the right child, and this one seems perfect." "Excellent. The judge can finalize the adoption papers this afternoon, and you can take custody immediately. The fee is $150,000. Rivera had heard enough. He stepped into the room, his service weapon drawn. Morrison flanking him with his FBI credentials displayed. "Willow Creek Police. Everyone on the ground, now." The reaction was immediate chaos. Helen Crawford screamed and dropped the bottle she was holding. The prospective adoptive parents backed against the wall in terror, and from somewhere in the house an alarm began sounding, a silent security system that would bring guards running. "Which baby belongs to Catherine Mills?" Rivera demanded, keeping his weapon trained on Crawford. "I don't know what you're talking about," Crawford stammered. "These are all legitimate adoptions. Everything is legal." "The girl who died Tuesday night after giving birth," Morrison interrupted, showing his FBI badge. "Where is her baby?" Crawford's eyes darted toward a crib near the window, where a newborn lay sleeping peacefully, unaware that his mother had died trying to protect him. Rivera moved toward the crib, but the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway made him pause. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before the house's security team arrived. "Morrison, get the baby. I'll cover the door." But as Morrison reached for Catherine's child, the nursery door exploded inward, revealing Judge Harold Whitmore flanked by 2 armed security guards. The judge's elegant facade had been replaced by cold fury. The mask of respectability finally dropped to reveal the monster beneath. "Nothing about this is legitimate," Rivera replied, his weapon trained on the judge. "You're running an illegal adoption ring, trafficking babies stolen from murdered teenagers." Whitmore smiled, expression devoid of warmth or humanity. "Prove it. These families are providing loving homes for unwanted children, and I'm facilitating legal adoptions through proper channels. What you're seeing is a charitable operation that saves children from lives of poverty and neglect. Catherine Mills wasn't unwanted. She died trying to protect her baby from monsters like you." "Catherine Mills was a prostitute and drug addict who died of an overdose," Whitmore replied. "The fact that she gave birth shortly before her death was simply fortunate timing that allowed us to save her child from following in her footsteps." Rivera felt rage building in his chest, but Morrison spoke first. "Judge Whitmore, I'm FBI Special Agent Frank Morrison, and you're under arrest for conspiracy, human trafficking, and murder." Whitmore's laugh was genuinely amused. "Agent Morrison, you've been undercover so long you've forgotten how the real world works. In 30 minutes, Detective Rivera will be arrested for trespassing, assault, and interfering with legitimate adoption proceedings. You'll be charged as his accomplice, and these babies will go to loving families who can provide them with opportunities they never would have had otherwise." "Not if the evidence gets out," Rivera said. "What evidence?" Whitmore gestured around the elegant nursery. I see legal adoption proceedings overseen by a sitting family court judge. Any allegations you make will be dismissed as the desperate accusations of a rogue cop who snapped under pressure. Rivera understood that Whitmore was right. Without federal backup, without support from his own department, he and Morrison were just two men with badges going up against a system designed to protect people like the judge. The wealthy families in the room would claim they believed they were participating in legal adoptions. Helen Crawford would disappear or claim she was simply following orders, and the babies would vanish into the underground adoption network. But then Morrison smiled, expression that made Judge Whitmore's confidence falter. Whitmore's face went pale. "You're lying. Agent Sarah Hendricks may be missing, but the Bureau's technical support team is very much operational. In about 5 minutes, federal agents are going to surround this property and arrest everyone involved in your trafficking operation." As if on cue, the sound of helicopters began growing louder outside, and through the nursery windows, Rivera could see black SUVs racing up the estate's main driveway. Judge Harold Whitmore, pillar of the Willow Creek community and respected member of the judiciary, collapsed into a chair as his carefully constructed criminal empire crumbled around him. The FBI raid that followed was swift and comprehensive. Within 2 hours, agents had arrested Judge Whitmore, Helen Crawford, 3 security guards, and the prospective adoptive parents who had been caught in the act of purchasing Catherine's baby. They also recovered evidence of a trafficking network that extended across 3 states and involved dozens of co-conspirators. Rivera held Catherine Mills' baby as paramedics checked the infant's health, marveling at how something so small and innocent had been at the center of such a web of corruption and violence. The child was healthy, unaware that his mother had died to protect him, unaware that he had been hours away from disappearing forever into an illegal adoption system. "What happens to him now?" Rivera asked Agent Victoria Cross, who had led the federal task force that took down the trafficking network. "He'll be placed in protective custody while we investigate whether Catherine had any living relatives who can take custody. If not, he'll be placed for adoption through legitimate channels." Agent Cross smiled at the sleeping infant. "But Detective, this child owes his life to his mother's courage and your determination to see justice done." Rivera thought about Catherine Mills, 17 years old and pregnant, keeping detailed records of her exploitation while secretly working with the FBI to bring down her abusers. She had been braver than most adults, smarter than most investigators, and more determined than anyone had given her credit for. As the sun set over Willow Creek on that autumn evening, Detective Marcus Rivera sat in his patrol car outside the police station, watching Chief Daniel Brooks being led away in handcuffs. The investigation had revealed that Brooks had been feeding information to Judge Whitmore's network, warning them about potential FBI operations and helping to cover up evidence of their crimes. Rivera's phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Morrison, who was being debriefed by the FBI task force. Catherine would be proud. Her baby is safe, and justice is being served. But Rivera knew that justice was a more complex concept than simple arrests and convictions. Catherine Mills was still dead. Agent Sarah Hendricks was still missing, and dozens of other victims had suffered at the hands of the trafficking network over the months and years it had operated. The town of Willow Creek would eventually heal from the scandal that had rocked its foundations. New leaders would be elected, new officials appointed, new trust slowly built. But the scars would remain, reminders that evil could flourish even in the most seemingly innocent places, when good people failed to ask hard questions about uncomfortable truths. Rivera locked Catherine's notebook in his desk drawer, a memorial to a girl who had been failed by every system designed to protect her, but who had found the strength to fight back even as she was dying. Her words would serve as evidence in dozens of trials, her courage would inspire other victims to come forward, and her baby would grow up knowing that his mother had loved him enough to sacrifice everything for his safety. "She's going to name him David," the social worker told Rivera. "Catherine David Chen. She wants him to carry his mother's memory." Rivera smiled. imagining Catherine Mills somewhere in whatever comes after, finally at peace knowing her baby was safe and loved. That evening, as Rivera walked through downtown Willow Creek, he passed the memorial garden where the town honored its fallen heroes. Soon there would be a new plaque added to the collection, a simple marker remembering Catherine Mills, age 17, who died protecting her child and exposing a network of corruption that had poisoned her community. The inscription would read, "Greater love hath no one than this, that someone lay down their life for another." Catherine Mills had been labeled a runaway, a prostitute, a problem child who died alone and unnamed. But Rivera knew the truth. She had been a hero, a young woman who had found the courage to fight monsters even when the whole world seemed to be against her. And in the end, that courage had saved not just her own child, but potentially dozens of other children who might have been stolen and sold by the trafficking network she helped expose. As Rivera drove home through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, past houses where families were settling in for the evening, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the smallest voice can speak the loudest truth, and sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. Catherine Mills was gone, but her story would live on, a testament to the power of courage in the face of impossible odds, and a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the world, light could still find a way to shine through. The case was closed, but Catherine's legacy was just beginning.